Hey, everybody. Welcome to our second episode of Unpacking the Metaverse. I'm Christina Elisha Vetta, founder of Social Hills, social media marketing and production agency located in Surrey Hills, Sydney. Thanks so much for joining us today. We are going to be joined shortly with Dr. Anna Harrison. And we're going to be talking about all things design relating to Metaverse and Metaverse technology. So I'm going to bring in Anna, and we're going to have a bit of a discussion around what the future of the Metaverse looks like in the context of design and for marketing and advertising in particular. So let's add Anna to the stream. Hi,
Hey,
Anna, how
Christina.
are you?
I am terrific. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. You're based in Brisbane, aren't you?
I'm in beautiful, sunny, freezing cold Brisbane today. Yes.
Well, it's no different to Sydney, really. I think it's sunny outside and it's definitely freezing.
Yeah. Well, at least it's not raining, right? So we can't complain.
Exactly. So thanks so much for joining me today. I know you and I have had a little bit of a chat already about, where the metaverse is and a whole bunch of, different topics. And I think we got really immersed in our conversation before we had this stream a couple of days ago. So I'm kind of keen to kick that off again, which is exciting. So can you tell us a little bit about, or anyone that's watching, a little bit about your expertise in design, and also how you founded your business RAMP.
Yeah, absolutely. And if our conversation in the car was anything to go by, this is going to be an epic next hour. So I'm excited for everyone that's tuned in. So, Christina, I've had a very non-standard and non-linear background. I've kind of spent time very early on in technology. So I built software and have an IT degree at the very beginning of life, so to speak. And then I transitioned into design, systems design and product design, and actually architectural, like house design for a while. And then airports. So I spent time designing airports, but really the experiences that people have in airports. And this is where I added both an interest and deep capability in things like experience design and behavioral economics and the psychology that people have as they're interacting with a space or a product or a service. So, today I've founded and I'm running a marketing diagnostics and intelligence company. So marketing comes into the fold as well. So it's kind of a pickle jam sandwich with cheese, my experience to date. But there you have it.
Yeah, interesting. And is that a toasted sandwich or in jaffle form, or?
Oh God, the old jaffle machine. Do you remember those? Yes, definitely a jaffle.
Sounds good to me. Great. So let's talk about, your understanding of the metaverse so far, in context of, your experience. So what's your understanding of where we're at, and what is exciting you the most about this emerging technology?
Yeah, I guess the most exciting thing is that you can't help but have the sense that we are literally in the wild west of a new era. So I was watching Billy the Kid on Stan the other day, and it kind of took you backwards in time, and you thought, God, it really was literally the wild west. And then, some of us can remember when the internet came around in sort of the late 90s, and all of a sudden it was this new era. And now we've got this thing called the metaverse. And for some people, maybe it's a fad and perhaps there's a tendency to just ignore it. But I think that would be a really big mistake. And especially when you look at like what are the behavioral changes that happen as a result of going from we use the internet right now, right? So you hop on your browser and use the internet. In the metaverse, we are inside the internet. Like it's a fundamentally huge and epic change. And so to be able to witness that and be part of the emerging world, I think is just exciting for everyone involved.
Yeah, I think for someone like you who has a really deep understanding of behavioral economics, being able to understand, how someone can go in and out of the metaverse and how their actions change depending on which world they're in, would be
Yeah.
interesting. you to, really get your head around, I guess.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating, right? So again, if you do a quick historical journey through time, back in the day of the carrier pigeon, there was a really long delay between stimulus and effect. So you'd send a letter by carrier pigeon, and 3 months later, the love of your life would have written back yes or no, right? And then anyway, fast forward to the telephone, and then fast forward to text messaging. And so the hit between when something happens and when we expect a response or get a dopamine hit, so
Mm-hmm.
physiologically, is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And so right now, even with things like text messages, there's a delay. Like something happens and there's a delay, and then we get the dopamine hit. When you're inside the internet, there is no delay. And so fundamentally, from a behavioral perspective, it's super exciting. And so the people who are fearful of what the future looks like might be like, oh, we'll get lost in this metaverse world and never want to come out. And yeah, we will, because it will be exciting. It'll be like getting cocaine straight to your veins all the time, 24/7. Like,
So when you talk about dopamine hit, it was funny because I was
Mhm.
talking to someone in my team the other day about she knew someone who was gambling NFT or trading NFTs, but
Yeah.
on a very large kind of, I guess, doing it a lot throughout the day.
Yeah.
So do you think that, with the metaverse, and obviously we're in closed metaverse worlds at the moment,
Yeah.
so wherever this person was doing these NFT trades was obviously within one platform. But
Uh-huh.
do you think that it can have some negative effects on society in terms of that dopamine or the need for the dopamine hit or the instant dopamine hit? And how do you think that we can, I guess,
Mm.
ensure that people can have a sense of control over that?
I think the underlying humanity that hasn't changed. So even
Mm,
though we don't have carrier pigeons anymore, we have instant text messaging. Our physiology and our the way that we are made up and what drives us as humans hasn't changed. That's a pretty slow moving beast, if you like. And so just because we go into the internet, our humanity isn't necessarily going to change. So is there a dark side to it? Absolutely, just the same as with any other addiction, right? And so we have addictions right now in real life, right? With gambling, with whatever else, right? Name your vice. They will continue to be in the metaverse. And we're already hearing news stories about kids that go into these internet cafes in China and die because they were having so much fun. They forgot to eat, they forgot to do anything, and they literally drop dead. So yes, that will happen. There's always a dark side, but I think that is a property of us being human, not of the metaverse.
mm. And I guess it doesn't matter which world you're kind of operating in, whether it's the real world or a metaverse world,
Yeah.
you still have a sense of what is right and what is wrong.
That,
So if you've already got a predisposition to gambling or, anything negative that can come
Mhm.
out of that, if you go, whether it be in the real world or the metaverse world, I'm going to guess that you're going to do it in either.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's really that self moderation and self control around, yeah, I may like donuts, but I need to eat things other than donuts. Yes, I do like the dopamine
I
hit
need
because
to
I,
drink water. I need
yeah,
to eat.
that's right. I do
To
need to
survive.
get up to my chest sometimes. Yeah. And I mean, I can imagine that the pool inside something like metaverse is that you can be anything and anyone. And so it's like not reading a fantasy novel about something, it's being inside the fantasy novel. And it's all immersive and all your senses are stimulated. So will people want to stay there? Yeah, of course they will.
Mm,
I would, you would, anyone would.
mm. I guess,
Yeah.
I mean, we're having this conversation right now. We're doing this through a streaming platform. What is the difference between you and I having entered a metaverse situation, as
Mhm.
opposed to doing this in the real world?
Yeah.
To me, I feel like there's no difference really. I mean, we're conversing, we're engaging with each
Mhm.
other. Why wouldn't we want to do it in a more engaged way or a more immersive way? We
Yeah,
were going to spending this time doing this interview regardless. So I
exactly.
think it's managing that going, okay, I'm going to do this in the metaverse. I'm going to do this in the real world. Like, it's like going into a Zoom or an email or a text message conversation. You were going to spend that time doing that anyway.
That's exactly right. Now, there's always would it be more fun to have a coffee and have this conversation? Yeah, for me, it still would. But then again, if we were doing it like proper in the metaverse, we would have blocked out everything else that's going on. So I know you were saying you're in a recording studio, so you kind of are in a bubble of a metaverse, right? I'm sitting in my office. I have no one else here right now, so I am in a little bit of a bubble. But
You're in an environment. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So my singular focus is on this interview and on our conversation right now. So in a way, we've elected to create a little bit of a bubble metaverse for the purpose of this call. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Well, that's the way I kind of understand it and can rationalize it.
Well,
Um,
it's the Wild West. We're making it up as we go, right?
that's exactly right. So, so let's talk about marketing and advertising.
Uh-huh.
And what are the opportunities that you see within the marketing and advertising space when it comes to metaverse and Web3?
Yeah, I think they're huge. And I think anyone who is in marketing and advertising who doesn't pop their head up for a moment and consider that the landscape is changing dramatically is missing an opportunity. So, the salient question is, what does the future of advertising and marketing look like in the metaverse? And the only thing I have absolute certainty about is that it looks a lot different. So there is definitely change. Go down to the pragmatics of right now we market and advertise through things like Google AdWords and Facebook, and we pop things up on phones and put them up on billboards. And when we jump into Roblox or Decentraland or any one of the metaverses that are out there right now, it doesn't make sense for our phone to ping us with a message from someone on Facebook anymore, right? So this very transactional AdWord based model of advertising and marketing that has evolved to date, I think loses relevance and no longer makes sense in the metaverse, which is why, when you look at what has been exciting and what has got a lot of press and excitement, it's things like a rock concert inside some fantasy world. And, that gets pressed back in our everyday social media channels for right now, because right now they're still distinct. But in the future of advertising and marketing, I think, will be very much a focus on things that are relationships based rather than transactional based.
And experience based.
Yeah, experience based, relationships based, and far less transactions based. And you can see evidence of that in the world we occupy right now. So when you look at the markers, they all point towards that being the case. I mean, right now, conversion rates across the board are about 2.35%. So, other than in a Las Vegas casino, there is no other industry where a 97.65% loss is celebrated. Right?
Yeah,
So
not at all.
99.75 of
Business
profits are not working. So is the success? Maybe, but it's certainly a data point that says whatever we're doing right now is losing relevance. It's not working as much. So when we jump into the metaverse, it's going to have to be something different. And to me, again, when you go back to the things that are true and consistent, regardless of what world we're in, it's the humanity. So we've blocked out transactional. We're interested in deeper relationships. We're interested in things that are experiential. Those are the things that are going to get attraction and engage in a far more authentic way. So, we talked about the dark side of the metaverse, but I think there's actually a lot of positive that can come out of these fantasy and virtual worlds. And that is that ability to connect in a more authentic way.
Yeah. So you mentioned conversion rates, and we're going to talk about metrics soon. But when it comes to marketing and advertising, I mean, in my head, I feel like the whole landscape is going to have to be wiped clean, and there's going to be a whole new way of thinking that's going to be required in order to advertise and market within these metaverse worlds. So what kind of skills are you seeing will be really key in bringing that to life, because we're obviously moving from this like 2D. I mean, we're bringing 3D animations more and more into advertising. I know that's a focus for us at Social Heals, is using more motion advertising, but we're going to be having to move into this 3D, 4D kind of situation. In order to do that, who do we need to make that happen? Because I'm wondering whether we have a bit of a skill shortage, and do we need designers? Are they 3D animators? Are they developers? Do we have enough of them to create what this world, I guess, is going to end up looking like?
Yeah, excellent question. And I think to answer it, let's look at the short-term horizon and the longer-term horizon, right? So
Yeah.
the pragmatics of designing for virtual worlds, yes, you need certain skills like 3D animation, and a lot, as you said before in the conversation, most of the virtual worlds right now, or the metaverses, are closed worlds. And so with that closure comes specificity around how you design inside that particular world. So Roblox has its own design studio, for lack of a better word, and you design using their tools inside their environment. Something like Minecraft, right? You can, I mean, in a way, that's a metaverse as well. If you go into Minecraft, you design using their blocks and their tools and so on. And then, things like Adobe Substance and 3D design tools and so on,
Which
general
is new.
stuff.
That's a new tool, isn't
Yeah.
it, that Adobe have just included in the Adobe Cloud?
Yeah, exactly. So it's tooling to make 3D modeling for virtual reality sort of applications much,
Very
much
cool.
easier. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, I
So
mean, you can see already that brands like Adobe have already kind of clued into this and are like,
yeah.
we need to be at the forefront of
Mhm.
offering this, design capability to designers to be able to do this kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to segue a little bit and focus on
I
technology and
love
then come back to your question.
segues.
So I haven't spoken, but when you look at technology, right, back in the beginning of the internet, it took a while before things like HTTP standards and then web APIs and web protocols and all of that came out. And so through those standards, all the different websites on the internet interconnect, and you can just type in a URL into a browser and you're actually going to different servers and into different people's homes, but you can speak the same language, so to speak. It all gets served up in your browser. And so at the moment there is no standardization in terms of interoperability between the different worlds that are out there. Sure, some of them are built on similar blockchains and that kind of technology, but if you go down to, like, let's say I'm a person, Anna, and I want to enter a metaverse, and I have all of my personal data, it belongs to me, it's stored on a blockchain, but it's my property.
Yeah.
Right now, there's no way to take me from Roblox and plop me into Decentraland and then into the sandbox as the same entity who carries my own identity. So
Mhm.
fundamentally, in terms of technology, and I'm certain that this is the way the world will go, is the community will end up developing standards where you can jump between the different metaverses, and so they'll end up being connected. And so just
Mm.
like right now when we're on the internet, you don't really notice that you're going from a server in America to one in Canada to one in Australia. You'll be
Yeah.
able to jump between these different universes with interoperability. So coming all the way back to your original question, and if I've
Yeah.
lost everyone by now, I don't blame you at all. Grab a cup of coffee and rejoin the conversation. So coming back to, in terms of talent, you know, there will probably be a moment where you can design stuff that can be ported between worlds. But for right now, you need to have skills inside a particular world and, develop to their particular tooling, unless you're making things for general VR applications and then the Adobe suites and, tools like that are coming online.
Yeah. So, do
So
you think that it's worth just specializing your time within a like specific platform, such as Decentraland, Roblox, and just harnessing that, doing it really well, with the hope that once things open up, then you'll be able to transfer that across, or once it's
yeah.
open up, other people will be able to come in and enjoy all of the work that you've done within that platform because it's going to be
Mhm.
open.
Yeah. I think probably to answer that, let's look at a further horizon, right? So we were looking tactical. Now let's look at a further horizon. And if you look at the further horizon and you go, okay, what are the skills that are actually needed to succeed in the metaverse? I think those skills transcend the tactical skills, like being able to use a particular tool to create a 3D animation. So, you know, your brand, for example, Social Hills, you're already ahead of the curve because you're looking at what's coming. You're noticing that there is this thing called the metaverse. And I
We're
would
already
say that,
talking about creating our own little world.
I know,
uh,
right? Oh, I want to be in there.
don't worry, you'll be
um,
one of the first to be invited.
yeah, awesome. We'll have a party. Yeah, so maybe our next interview could be inside your new world. That would be super
That would be
cool.
awesome.
But yeah, I think the biggest skill that's needed, is actually imagination and creativity. Because for now, the things that are going to stand out in any one of these, metaverses, it really doesn't matter which one you pick for the moment, because things are emerging. The road is being built right before our eyes. But right
Mm,
now, it's creativity. It's like, what is the activation that you put together? Think of that first, and then find the talent who can bring it to life. And if it's going to go into Decentraland or the sandbox or Roblox or Hyperverse or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Like,
mhm.
the cool thing will be the activation itself.
Your creative concept and how you've brought that to life, and what are you
Yeah.
doing to attract people into that
Mhm.
space and keep them there for a long period of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, for now, it's hard to attract people into those spaces. For now, you're activating the people who are in those spaces already, and then
Yeah.
bringing the results of that back into our traditional social media channels, and
Mm.
sort of, hyping up the hype, if you like.
Yeah, so I think this is a good segue into our discussion around metrics, and
Yeah.
our metrics, the measurement of, performance in the metaverse is going
Mhm.
to change, because there are different types of measurements, such as time spent in space, how many people have visited a certain, I guess, quadrant, or I don't know
Mhm.
what the terminology is going to be. Um, how many people have, asked a question, at a specific stand,
Mhm.
or engaged with someone that was manning your world. So, what's your understanding of some of the metrics that you think are probably going to be key in terms of,
Mhm.
marketers and advertisers measuring performance within these metaverse worlds?
Yeah, so again, I'll probably answer the question in two parts. I think that, ultimately the measure of success is that quantification of your product or service or brand. So, loosely speaking, dollars in the bank, right? But dollars in the bank is kind of could be a faraway thing and hard to track back to what put the dollars there. So the more interesting question is, how do we measure progress towards dollars? How do we measure progress? Is it time spent in the metaverse? Is it the depth of relationships formed with your brand? Is it eyeballs of a particular sneaker? Those it will be, I mean, it's to be defined what the metrics that matter are inside the metaverse, just as all of that happened in on social media, right? So
Mm,
on social media channels, sure, we can track number of impressions, we can track how many people saw a particular post flick past their eyes in a feed, but that doesn't buy shoes. Someone
yeah.
putting shoes in their shopping cart and adding their cryptocurrency, Visa card, whatever, to the transaction and actually buying the shoes is what buys shoes. And so if we go back to, what is the future of advertising and marketing? And if we say, okay, we're moving from transactional to relationships based, then I think the problem sort of, unpacks into how do we measure the depth of relationships, because that
Mm.
will give us the best indication as to how closely we're tracking and how much we're progressing towards that dollars in the bank moment.
Yeah, and it could be a variety of metrics that kind of lead to go, yep, this is the depth of
Mhm.
the relationship, this is the final metric, and you might have to look at a couple. In my mind, I'm kind of looking at how we, I guess, activate campaigns. So there's awareness,
Mhm.
consideration, conversion,
Yeah.
and then what do those metrics look like in the metaverse? So awareness could be, how many times someone has walked past a billboard and viewed it or clocked it, whatever that might look like. How many people have walked within a certain space. And then I guess the next part of the funnel could be how many people have looked at an NFT, a product, could be a piece of clothing on a rack. And then I guess when you come down to the conversion part, how many people have actually purchased that NFT or made a transaction.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that it'll just be like taking the fundamentals of what we know today and translating them over to the metaverse and then creating metrics within that, those, I guess, the normal funnel that we
I
know.
mean, there's again a world of opportunity here because all the interactions are digital. Technically, they can be tracked, right? So when you describe that awareness, so on, all the way through to conversion, the slices in the funnel, you can actually imagine a world where in the metaverse, someone gives an exchange of value to signify they're interested in a brand. So if I'm carrying, imagine you're carrying your own identity as a little thing on your shoulder, right? And that identity holds all the keys to what interests me, et cetera, et cetera. That can actually tune us towards the things that we are interested in. So we'll be looking at them and maybe we flick like a little micro cent or something at the brand that we want to give a thumbs up to. And so it's very possible that the actual tracking of metrics inside the metaverse will become far more accurate and meaningful. And, in real life, and this is sort of the problem that we've solved with RAMP, we've taken the customer journey and broken it down into 6 really important milestones that people's relationship progression goes through, and then we measure it for brands. And so, if you apply that same thing in the metaverse, you actually will be able to capture far more detailed and interesting information around, hey, I like the look of your brand, or I've come back again to have a cup of coffee with your brand. Oh, I've come back again. And you know what? Let me taste a little bit of your brand. Let me try that t-shirt onto my avatar and see whether it fits and whether I like it. So right now, all of those things are a little bit loose and we crudely measure them with, impressions and so on. Yeah. Whereas I think in the metaverse, there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity to fine tune that and make the metrics far more relevant and meaningful.
And it could be bespoke to brands as well, depending on the world you've created. As to, what do you see value in? What does, like recommending an avatar to a brand, what does that look like from a value perspective? What does that recommendation look like?
That's it. You've made me think of, I was at a Coldplay concert up here in Brisbane a number of years ago, and everyone in the audience got one of those bands that lit up at a certain point in the concert. Epic, right? And so, imagine if like in the metaverse, you give everyone a little band. And then again, because it's all digital, you can actually track where those bands go and how they interact and where those people are moving about. And, do you pass your band on to someone else? So things like recommending a brand and loyalty and fandom are just so much more measurable. And again, it comes back to the question you asked earlier. And I think the biggest barrier that we have is our own imagination, because you can create anything. And so in a way, you're starting with absolutely no constraints.
Yep. No, you can craft it exactly the way you want it, in terms of what it means to you, your brand, you personally, and what kind of environment you create. So there's one, we're going to talk about, recommendations for platforms. But before we get to that, had an interesting conversation with someone around segmentation within the metaverse, and how do you target people within the metaverse. And they said, well, it's not going to be based on the physical self. It will be based on who you decide to be within the metaverse. So I guess if your persona wants to take on, I don't know, like just say a gothic persona, or if you want to be purely business, depending on who you craft your avatar to be, is going to be the person that you're, or going to be the target market. So if a brand wanted to find someone that was like-minded, they would be targeting you based on your avatar attributes and not based on, the person, the physical person behind the screen or behind the
Yeah.
glasses.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, here, if we unpack all of that, and it's already happening, I think, outside of the metaverse, if brands are starting to target their target audiences based on much more deeper and interesting core values rather than just things like age or gender, those kinds of demographics are pretty coarse and not as interesting. So an example from aviation, for example, when people used to design airports and airport services, they'd look only at, are you a business traveler or are you a holiday maker? And it turns out that distinction actually isn't that relevant at all. What airports should be designing for is the person's relationship to time in an airport. There are people, and like, as soon as I say this, you're going to be, yep, I'm one of these, right? Like, there are people who want to spend minimal time at the airport. It's like,
Well, I think a lot of people are like that at the moment. I mean, if you look at the news, how many people are being banked up before going on holidays? I think that's probably
that's it. Whereas for some people, their holiday begins the moment they get to the airport, so they have a really different relationship with that airport time. And anyway, the point of that example is that time is actually the core value. And so when we go into the metaverse, it'll really be an exercise in figuring out what are the core values for our particular avatars. And then, that distinction between the physical self and the virtual self becomes really important, because in the metaverse, your physical self actually isn't that important anymore. And especially when we bring into the picture things like cryptocurrencies and, currencies that are earned inside the specific metaverses that we're occupying, even your economic designation in the real world becomes less relevant, because if you're willing to work inside the metaverse and earn their currency, you could become quite wealthy there, even though you're on minimum wage out here. So I think the demographics distinctions definitely will be around finding what is the core value of the avatar and far less of the person in the real world. So I've got an interesting segue on this one as well. I was reading recently that
before you go to that segue, we just have a question that's come through. So can you hold that thought?
Absolutely. I'll hold my thought.
All right, so we've got Thomas Palazzo. So thank you so much for joining us. So he says, hello, great session so far. Thank you, Thomas. I have a question for you, Anna. As a creative director and creative strategist, what skills would I or should I develop to experiment in the metaverse? And I think this goes back to the skills question we were discussing before. So how deep should my knowledge go to create a simple experience?
I think, again, pick the actual universe or metaverse that you're going to be jumping into and then work backwards to figure out what skills you need. And I would imagine if you're a kick-ass 3D modeler and artist right now without anything to do in the metaverse, the gap between that and actually using the tools for that particular metaverse are not going to be huge. Like, at the end of the day, it's all people making things inside, with tools. So I'd say
have that fundamental understanding, you'll be able to apply that quite easily, I would assume.
Yeah, exactly. So, pick your metaverse first. Look at the talent and capability in your team or whatever agency you're working with to bring a particular activation online, and then work backwards and fill the gaps.
That's great. And just, Thomas, hang around, because we're going to talk about the different platforms. Anna's got some recommendations for us. But before we do, Anna, your segue that you wanted to jump into. So
I hope I can remember it. It seemed super interesting in my head at the time, but here we go. Oh, I remember. This is what I was I was reading this stuff and it just absolutely fascinated me. So, and this is, again, a positive from the metaverse rather than the dark side. And it was that people, so when you jump into the metaverse, very often people put on, they're more confident and they live the life they would like to have, which they may not have in the real world. But what research is finding is that whatever kind of confidence and persona you develop in the metaverse, you actually bring back into your own real life, and you raise your confidence levels, and things start moving in real life in that same direction that you're projecting in the metaverse. So it's an interesting data point. Like right now, it's very possible to have a big disconnect between your real self and your metaverse persona. But it turns out that that gap actually gets closed because you bring some of that fantasy confidence back into your real world and realize the benefits of that in
Yeah.
day to day. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny because I always think about like, what do I want my avatar to look like? And I'm really confused about it. Like, obviously, I want it to look like me, but then I know there's like other things that you can do. Like, yeah. So I think what I want to work out is where I want to invest my time. So that's coming up to my next question,
Uh-huh.
which is where should we be playing in, like, do any of the
Mhm.
metaverse platforms have a specific benefit over another? And what's your understanding of the different ones? So like Roblox, Decentraland, Sandbox.
Mhm.
What are your recommendations around if a marketer, advertiser, or even just anyone at home, a creative director, creative strategist wanted to jump in, where do you
Mhm.
think they should invest their time? And does it vary?
Yeah, I mean, right now I would be looking at where is the audience I want to reach sitting in right now and jump into that
Audience?
world. But the interesting thing about most of the worlds, I think there might be one or two that are free, but a lot of the other worlds actually require you to purchase real estate, so to speak, inside.
Decentraland, for
Yeah,
example.
like Decentraland and Hyperverse and Sandbox and all of them, you have to do things inside that world to
Mm,
earn currency or to tip real currency in, so that you have your virtual piece of real estate that you could create things on. So
mm,
you either have to, I mean, right now it seems to me that you would be well placed to make a commitment to one of the metaverses so that you can establish a footprint and create things in it, or partner with someone who already has a footprint and has made the money inside
yeah.
that metaverse. So, like you can't just. I actually had this. I was speaking with someone who, like a developer the other day, and I'm like, okay, my next presentation, I want to do it in Decentraland, and so can you build me a stage, and then I want to like fly in on a slide, and then appear
That
on the
sounds so
stage.
much
I
fun.
want all my presentation slides to be like holograms, which I just flick out of my pocket, and they're sitting all around me. And the guy just looks at me and says, you can't just build a slide to enter Decentraland because you don't control that universe. So sorry, no. And B, you have to buy some real estate if you want to set up a stage. I'm
That
like,
sounds
oh,
so much fun.
right. It would be so much fun, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, a regular keynote presentation seems kind of boring. Like, I actually would like to run my next workshop inside a metaversey kind of space. But from what I understand, and I'm sure that you're going to have people on the show who know more about this particular topic than I do, but I think you actually have to earn or buy real estate inside these worlds so that you can
Mm,
create something which is
yeah.
your own.
Got it. So first, find out where your audience is, one.
Yes. Yeah.
Second, work out where the budget is going to come from if you need to purchase real estate. And then whether, you strategically partner with another entity to be able
Mhm.
to kind of enter in through that way.
Mhm.
Or maybe purchase a segment of their real estate that they've already purchased that can you rent? Like,
I mean,
real
yeah,
estate.
why not? I think you've just invented like a whole new model, which is renting space in metaverses.
Airbnb for the metaverse.
Right, right?
No one
Exactly. I mean,
steal that at home. If anyone's watching, that's my
that's
idea.
right. It's Christina's idea, trademark, patent, everything.
I'm
It
sure
began
someone's
right
already come
here.
up with it. I don't think I'm the first to be thinking
No,
along those lines.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think fundamentally it comes back to what kind of eyeballs are in the world that you're going into. So again, I was speaking to someone the other day, and I said, "Oh, tell me a bit about Roblox." Now, Roblox is something that's very community oriented. They've got a very strong ethical sort of perspective around safe engagement and all of that. But I
So
think most
yeah,
of the audience there is 12,
they're quite
and so
young, and it feels
yeah,
very young. The
yeah,
actual environment feels young. So
hmm,
Roblox is probably the one that I've jumped into just to have a bit of a look. And I have to
uh-huh.
admit, I'm going to admit now that the thing that drew me in was Paris World. So Paris Hilton has her own world,
Yes,
and she always talks about it. And I follow her. I think she's great. Um, and yeah, it was her talking about it that I was like, okay,
uh-huh.
I want to start investigating where, what these worlds look like. So I went
Hmm.
in and I had a look at Paris World. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
And actually, she recently said that I think she had a New Year's party in her world.
Hmm.
So it was kind of like Times Square, but like in Paris World. And she
Yeah.
said she had the best time. Like it was like she got to engage with her fans. So I think the capability of like even celebrities being able to
Uh-huh.
safely be in a space and conversing with their fans
Yeah.
from the comfort of their home, also like it's massive.
It's massive. And I think that particular activation had like something like 6 times more people at that New Year's Eve party in virtual New York Times Square than in real
Yes,
life. Like
that
it was
yeah,
absolutely massive.
mm,
And so that's an interesting metaverse because they have all the tools
yeah,
inside there and they have an army of developers, and it's a little bit like Squarespace where you can jump in and build a Squarespace website for
yeah,
clients, and Squarespace provides all the tooling and what have you. And so inside there all the tooling is provided, and you can hire an army of developers to
that's right.
build up whatever you want
Yeah.
inside that world.
So take the templates or the tools that
Mhm,
they have available and then enhance them with your own developers and
mhm.
do whatever it is, which is obviously something that she's done.
Yep, exactly. I'm sure she
Um,
didn't build it on her own with her hands.
Look, I've
Probably.
heard she's a
I
very
mean,
intelligent woman. Maybe. Um,
maybe.
so Thomas has stuck around and he has another really long question. So we might have to break this up into
Okay,
sections.
give it to me. And thanks for
Okay.
sticking around, Thomas.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. We hope you're enjoying the chat. So he says or asks, is it possible that today is better to make noise outside the metaverse about what you're doing inside the metaverse? So, yeah, than actually investing in doing new edgy experiences in the metaverse. I mean, there's no audience as such yet, or is it very limited? This is the right time to experiment, but how much to invest? And how do we measure it? So we've talked about measurement in earlier part of this conversation. We
Mhm.
talked about metrics and things, so it's really the sky's the limit in terms of that's okay. He says my English is terrible. It's okay. We understand.
Your English is
Um,
awesome.
so yeah, do we measure it? You were saying impressions, purchases, etc. But if I'm selling this to a client, how do I excite the possibilities? So I think first part of the question is how do we promote the metaverse outside the metaverse? So I think
Mhm,
in the early times, we would that is probably key. You would need to do some level of awareness outside to be able to coax people in
mhm,
and sell the benefit. There has to be some kind of benefit. Why would your audience want to come from the outside and visit and see what you're doing on the inside? I would
mhm.
say. What do you
Yeah, and I
think,
think
Emma?
it kind of comes all the way back to the start of our conversation, which is that I think for today, not for tomorrow, but for today, the biggest payoff of doing something interesting inside the metaverse is that you can bring it back out and distribute it across traditional social media channels, right? So the Paris Hilton New Year's Eve thing was inside the metaverse, people attended it, but the bigger payoff from that event is the amplification that happens in the New York Times,
Outside
on Twitter and outside. So
on
where all the
her own
eyeballs,
channels, which she has massive influence.
uh-huh,
And I would say with someone big like her, Roblox probably had some kind of endorsement behind it because they're like, well, we need people to use this platform, so we're going to probably pay for X amount so that you can promote us. I'm
For
going to
sure.
guess.
And I mean, that's an interesting platform. The guys behind there, I think it's a couple of brothers, maybe there's a couple of more founders, but they started building that in the late 90s, which is a long time before most people were born. Not
It's
me, I
ages
was
ago.
alive back then, but
I had the
yeah.
foresight back then
Yeah,
to
like
know.
it's crazy. It's an infinity in technology years, right, to
Mm,
have built it back then. So they've been working at it for a really long time. And I think, yeah, so to Thomas's point, yes, it may be hard to convince someone that an activation inside the metaverse today is going to directly benefit your sales from the people who saw you in the metaverse. I think what's much easier is to convince the client that putting a stake down inside the metaverse positions you as a forward thinking brand and a forward looking brand. And then amplifying the results of that just becomes a really cool piece of creative and, like content, which you can amplify on other social media channels for now. Because your buyers may not be inside the metaverse just yet. I mean, when you look at how many people are on these platforms, it's like in the 20 millions, 30, 40 millions, I think, in terms of active users. I may
mm,
have the wrong number of zeros, but I think that's about right. And so the number of people on Instagram is billions. So,
yeah.
orders of
So there's
magnitude
massive
more.
opportunity to coax people from existing real world platforms into the metaverse. And I'm just thinking about, like when we work with a client, we look at what are the client's objectives. And I would think that the same thing would apply to if you had a client and they were asking you to build a world inside the metaverse. What are their
Mhm.
objectives? What do they want to get out of it? And then in terms of coaxing them in, my guess is, I mean, back to like fundamentals of marketing, what are you going to offer them?
Yep.
Maybe we've got 25% off, but only in our metaverse world. You need to enter in, and maybe that's how you kind of coax them and introduce them in
Mhm.
and give them some kind of benefit, or you get a free
Exactly.
or I don't know what it is, but
Oh,
you need to work out what the hook is. And it might be you might have to test and work out what is going to resonate
mhm.
and what's going to get the traffic.
That's it. And, like anything that's kind of novel and unique, like I'm thinking back to a few years ago, we did a marketing activation with Microsoft. So we had this gratitude app where you could send a coffee through your phone to someone to say thank you. And Microsoft picked us up and they used us to open their conference in Las Vegas, 35,000 people live in the
So cool.
audience and 2 million people watching it on live stream. So it was huge. And Gabriella Schuster gets up and in the first 3 minutes sends everyone in the audience a thanks coffee, right? So that was done in real life. But you could imagine doing an activation like that inside the metaverse where you have something like, hey, the opening to our annual marketing conference will happen inside the metaverse and we're going to send all the attendees there a cup of coffee, whatever it
Yeah.
is. Right. So, and then translate, and how does that come back into the real world? Well, bring your metaverse token, NFT, whatever it is, over to Starbucks and collect your coffee.
Mm.
And
So I
it's a
think
way
that
to.
there's three things that kind of come to mind is customer
Mm,
journey, customer
mhm,
experience, and creativity. So thinking creatively around, the sky,
mhm.
like what you said, the sky is the limit. Like, what do you want to do? What do you want people to do? What do you want to get
Yeah.
out of it?
And I think, fundamentally, how do we unlearn everything that we know?
Yeah.
I think when we were chatting on the phone, Christina, I was like, I jumped into some metaverse, and inside this metaverse was like a board table with avatars who didn't have legs sitting around this table having a meeting. And it's like, why? Like, sure, that's the way we sit around and have meetings in real life, but why are we
No,
doing that in the metaverse?
I want a slippery dip. Now that you
Right? Like, I want to arrive on a slide. Yeah.
I want
I
to
want
dive off a diving board and have my meeting in a
That's
diving
it.
pool underwater.
That's
Like,
it. I think you're
there's
ready to launch your tech startup, Christina, with slippery dips in the office. Yeah, totally. So
I think I need some investors first. So if anyone wants to invest, The team at
That's
Social
it.
Hills have lots of ideas that we're ready to bring to life. So
And you know
yeah,
what? That's the most important ingredient.
ideas. Yeah, 100%.
Definitely.
So yeah, thanks so much, Thomas. I think we're close to wrapping this up as well. Um, yeah, and I'm glad that you found this insightful. So my final question to you, Anna, is it kind of comes in two parts. What's next
Yeah.
in terms of your exploration of the early stages of the metaverse technology, and what do you like? What's your advice to advertisers and marketers now in 2022? Like, how do people get started? Where do you think they should start?
Yeah. Let me answer the second question first because it's far more interesting. I can't imagine
Okay.
too many people want to know what I'm doing next. But in terms of if you're a marketer or an advertiser, what would I do in your shoes? I would accept the fact that the world is changing and experiment. Like right now, you can't get it wrong. So, Google top 10 metaverses right now, pick one of them at random and just go in and start experimenting. Have a half day a week where your team gets permission to go into this new world and to just try things out. And out of that will emerge strategies, creative ways. You're putting this in place at your team next week, aren't you, Christina? You're going to be like, everyone, we're inside Blocktopia. Let's do it
Yeah,
and build some world.
I think I'm going to have to start blocking out a few hours a week just to
Yeah,
have a look. Yeah, and
that's
play
it.
around.
I think that's it. Like, accept that the world is changing. We're not going to be blasting people with Google AdWords 10 years from now. We
Mm.
aren't. So, as an industry, we need to shift and we need to look at how do we create more meaningful relationships with the people we're trying to sell to at the end of the day. And part of that is just experimental. Like, could you have predicted what the Wild West was like when you were actually a settler in America? No, you couldn't. Like, you'd go up, you'd pull up a piece of land, and then someone would come along and shoot you and take your land. And you kind of predicted that. It's the same with the metaverse. You have to go in there and get your hands dirty and play around a bit. So
And
I would
secure
start
your little piece of paradise.
it's a paradise. That's it. That's it. And start doing cool things. Like, just do cool things and try things out.
Yeah, no, that's a really good motivator. I think, especially if you're a creative person, you've got these wacky ideas. Like, there's
Uh-huh.
nothing that's off limits when it comes to the metaverse.
Exactly.
So what's next for you? So where are you
Next for
focusing your
me,
time and attention?
yeah. Actually, one of my projects, which I would like to get off the ground in a couple of years, is this year I published a book called Digital Brand Romance, and it's all about how do you form relationships in digital spaces. And I want to do a second edition of that focused entirely on the metaverse. So that's
Mm,
something that's coming in my midterm future. And for the moment, it's 100% focus on RAMMP and getting that launched and in market.
that's great.
So good
Well, the
time.
team at Social Hills are going to be watching what you're up to closely, and yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing what that next book is going to look like.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks for the chat today. This was the highlight of my week.
Thank you. Oh, it's been wonderful. Thanks so much, and we'll keep in touch. And I'm hoping that there'll be like a part 2, part 3 of this conversation, because I think that, judging by some of the comments that we've had, the audience has found this quite insightful. So yeah, thank you very much.
Wonderful. Excellent. And thanks for tuning in and listening, everyone.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks. Bye.